I'm Captain Rebecca Hayes, and this is the story of how my father told me that real heroes don't come home. Because I survived 3 deployments in Iraq, while my fallen comrades didn't. He spent years using my survivor's guilt to shame my military service at family gatherings and social events. What he didn't know was that Colonel Sarah Mitchell, my war buddy who had saved my life in Fallujah, would be the keynote speaker at my daughter's high school graduation, where she would recognize me publicly as one of the bravest soldiers she had ever served alongside.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the chapel at West Point as I stood in formation with 43 other officers, wearing my dress blue uniform with the bronze star and purple heart ribbons that represented 8 years of distinguished military service. Today's ceremony would mark my promotion to captain and my transition to a training command position at Fort Benning, the culmination of a career that had taken me from the streets of Fallujah to the corridors of the Pentagon. General Robert Morrison called my name, and I stepped forward with the precision I had maintained throughout my military service, despite the lingering pain in my right leg where an IED fragment had shattered bone during my second deployment. The injury that earned me the Purple Heart had also ended my infantry career, but it hadn't diminished my dedication to training the next generation of soldiers who would face the same challenges I had survived. The citation General Morrison read aloud detailed the convoy ambush in Anbar province, where I had coordinated the evacuation of 12 wounded soldiers while maintaining defensive positions under sustained enemy fire. What it didn't mention were the faces of Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Johnson who hadn't made it home from that firefight, or the weight of command decisions that still visited my dreams 8 years later. As the general pinned the captain's bars to my uniform, the photographer captured the moment perfectly. Me standing at attention, the new rank insignia catching the morning light streaming through the chapel's stained glass windows, my expression showing the quiet resolve of someone who had earned advancement through combat leadership rather than peacetime bureaucracy. Behind me in the audience sat my daughter Emma, now 17, and preparing for her own high school graduation in 2 months. Her proud smile reminded me why I had chosen the training command position over another deployment, the opportunity to be present for the milestones I had missed during her early years while serving overseas. My husband, Colonel David Hayes, stood in his own dress uniform, his Special Forces insignia representing a parallel career of dangerous deployments and classified missions. We had met during a joint operation in Baghdad, 2 professionals who understood the weight of military service and the cost of protecting something larger than ourselves. The small reception afterward was filled with fellow officers who had served alongside me in Iraq and Afghanistan, people who measured success in missions completed and lives saved rather than civilian metrics of wealth or social status. Stories were shared about fallen comrades, successful operations, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform in combat zones. But as I held my new captain's bars and listened to conversations about upcoming assignments and training responsibilities, I couldn't escape the memory of last weekend's family barbecue, where my father had made his position clear about my military service. His words still echoed in my mind, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never worn a uniform or understood the weight of combat leadership.
That weekend, David and I drove the 2 hours from Fort Benning to Atlanta to celebrate my promotion with my family, carrying a framed copy of the promotion ceremony photograph along with my new captain's bars. Mom had prepared her famous Sunday pot roast, and the dining room table was set with the good china that only appeared for major occasions. Even my younger sister Ashley had driven down from Nashville with her kids, making it a full family gathering. My father arrived from his law office downtown, still wearing his expensive suit and carrying the air of professional importance that came from 40 years of corporate litigation. At 68, Robert Hayes Sr. had built a successful practice representing insurance companies and corporate clients, measuring success exclusively in billable hours, settlement amounts, and the prestige that came with his downtown Atlanta office. He had never served in the military, having received multiple deferments during Vietnam for law school, and then establishing his career during the years when military service was viewed skeptically by his professional circles. His understanding of military life came entirely from movies and news coverage, filtered through a worldview that valued civilian achievement over military sacrifice. As we gathered around the table, I carefully placed the promotion ceremony photograph beside my plate, my new captain's bars resting in their presentation case. The image captured the solemnity of the West Point Chapel, General Morrison pinning the rank insignia to my uniform, David standing at attention in the background with unmistakable pride. Mom picked up the photograph first, studying it with the careful attention she gave to all my military achievements. Her brother had served in Vietnam, and she understood military recognition in ways that didn't require explanation. "Rebecca, you look so dignified, so strong," she said, her voice warm with maternal pride. "Captain Hayes, it sounds so official and important." Ashley's teenage son Jake examined the captain's bars with genuine curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about military rank structure and what it meant to be promoted based on combat performance. At 16, he seemed fascinated by the idea of leadership under pressure and service to something larger than personal interests. The conversation naturally turned to my new position at Fort Benning, where I would be training infantry officers who would deploy to the same combat zones where I had served. I explained how my combat experience would help prepare young lieutenants for the realities of leading soldiers in dangerous situations. But my father barely acknowledged the photograph, spending most of dinner checking his phone for messages from clients and partners. When conversation turned to my military achievements and what the promotion meant for my career, he looked up with the kind of polite attention he gave to topics that didn't directly concern his professional interests. "That's nice, Rebecca. Though I have to say, I've never understood why the military makes such a big production out of these ceremonies. In the legal profession, we advance based on results, not rituals." The comment stung, but I tried to explain that military ceremonies represented more than individual achievement. They honored the soldiers who had served alongside me and recognized the responsibility that came with combat leadership. Dad set down his phone and gave me his full attention for the first time that evening, but his expression carried something I hadn't expected. Not pride or curiosity, but something that looked almost like disappointment mixed with frustration. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about this for years, and I need to say something that might be difficult to hear," he began, his voice carrying the measured tone he used during closing arguments. "The real heroes from your deployments didn't come home to receive promotions and ceremony photos. They made the ultimate sacrifice while you survived to collect recognition." The words hit like a physical blow, delivered with the casual precision of someone accustomed to dismantling opposing arguments in courtroom settings.
The silence that followed was deafening. David's grip on my hand tightened under the table, and I could see the controlled anger building in his expression. Mom set down her fork with a sharp clink against the china, her face pale with shock at what her husband had just said to their daughter. "Real heroes don't come home, Rebecca," Dad continued, seemingly oblivious to the devastation his words were causing. "They sacrifice everything for their country and their fellow soldiers. The fact that you survived 3 deployments while others didn't suggests you were in safer positions, making less dangerous choices, taking fewer risks than the men and women who actually gave their lives." I thought about Sergeant Rodriguez, who had bled out in my arms during the Anbar Province firefight while I coordinated the evacuation. About Corporal Johnson, 19 years old, who had thrown himself on a grenade to save our squad. About the weight of command decisions that had brought some soldiers home alive while others came home in flag-draped coffins. "Dad, survival doesn't diminish service," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady.
The soldiers who didn't make it home were heroes, but that doesn't mean those of us who survived aren't worthy of recognition for our service and sacrifice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He leaned back in his chair with the kind of patronizing expression he used during cross-examinations, as if he was about to expose a fundamental flaw in my argument. Rebecca, in my profession, we deal in facts and evidence. The fact is that you collected promotions and medals while your fellow soldiers collected death certificates. That's not heroism. That's survival instinct and good fortune. Ashley looked stricken, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Jake stared at his plate, the teenage fascination with military service suddenly replaced by confusion about why his grandfather was attacking his aunt's combat record. "Robert, that is enough," Mom said, her voice shaking with anger I had rarely heard from her. "Your daughter served her country with honor and distinction. She earned every promotion and recognition through leadership under combat conditions." Dad waved his hand dismissively as if her words were emotional arguments that could stand up to his logical analysis. "Helen, I'm not attacking her service. I'm simply pointing out that real heroism requires the ultimate sacrifice. The soldiers who came home get parades and promotions. The soldiers who died get folded flags and military funerals. Which group made the greater sacrifice?" The cruelty of his logic was breathtaking. By his reasoning, every living veteran was somehow less heroic than those who had died, as if survival itself was evidence of inadequate courage or commitment. It reduced combat service to a simple equation where death was the only true measure of valor. David finally spoke, his voice carrying the controlled authority that made him effective in Special Operations Command. "Sir, with respect, your daughter led soldiers in combat operations that saved lives and completed critical missions. Military heroism isn't measured by who dies. It's measured by who stands up when others need them most." Dad turned his attention to David with the kind of professional courtesy he showed opposing counsel in court proceedings. "Kennel Hayes, I respect your service as well, but let's be honest about military culture. The real heroes are the ones whose families receive Gold Star status, not the ones whose families attend promotion ceremonies." The evening ended with strained goodbyes and a family dinner that had turned into a courtroom cross-examination of my military service. As we loaded our car for the drive back to Fort Benning, I could hear Dad inside, already moving the conversation to safer topics like Ashley's real estate business and Jake's college plans. But his words followed me home that night, echoing in my mind with the same persistent presence as the sounds of incoming mortars and the weight of soldiers I couldn't save.
3 weeks after our disastrous family dinner, I was conducting training exercises at Fort Benning when my phone started buzzing with notifications I couldn't check due to the classified nature of our field operations. By the time I could step away during the lunch break, my personal Facebook account had exploded with activity that made my stomach drop. Dozens of comments on a post I hadn't made, shares from people I didn't recognize, and private messages that ranged from supportive to hostile. It took several minutes of scrolling to find the source, and when I did, the betrayal felt worse than any enemy fire I had faced in Iraq. Dad had posted a lengthy essay on his law firm's Facebook page that morning, using my promotion ceremony photo as the header image. The post was titled, "Real Heroism versus Military Theater, A Father's Perspective on True Sacrifice." As the father of a career military officer, I've been reflecting on the difference between real heroism and military self-promotion, he had written in that polished tone he used for legal briefs. My daughter recently received another promotion and ceremony, complete with photographs and formal recognition. But I keep thinking about the soldiers who didn't come home to receive promotions, the ones who made the ultimate sacrifice while others survived to collect recognition. I scrolled through his post in mounting horror as he systematically used my military service to make a broader point about authentic heroism versus survivor recognition. He described my 3 combat deployments as evidence that I had been in relatively safe positions compared to the soldiers who had died, suggesting that survival itself was proof of inadequate risk-taking and commitment. But the most damaging part came when he shared details from our private family conversations, including specific information about soldiers who had died under my command, using their deaths to support his argument about who deserved to be called heroes. The real heroes from her deployments are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. The ones who came home get promotion ceremonies and professional advancement. I love my daughter, but I think we need to be honest about what constitutes genuine sacrifice versus career advancement in military uniform. The post had generated over 200 reactions and 89 comments in just a few hours. His professional network of attorneys, judges, and business associates were engaging enthusiastically, with several legal colleagues adding their own observations about military culture and veteran recognition. The comments were brutal. His followers had latched onto his narrative about authentic heroism, debating whether surviving combat made someone less heroic than those who died. Someone had shared my promotion photo to a veterans discussion group with commentary about participation trophy military culture. Several responses included specific criticisms of my appearance in the ceremony photo, questioning whether I looked like someone who had faced real combat compared to the actual heroes who hadn't survived their deployments. But what made my blood run cold were the comments from people who seemed to know details about my combat record that should have been private family information. Discussions about specific firefights, casualty numbers, and command decisions that could only have come from Dad sharing confidential details I had trusted him with during family conversations. All of this happened by Dad looking for attention. I looked at my phone, clenched in my fists. I was trained for combat, not emotional terrorism. My phone rang as I sat in my office at Fort Benning, trying to process how my own father had turned my military service into content for his professional networking while exploiting the deaths of soldiers who had served under my command. David's voice was tight with controlled fury when he answered. "Rebecca, I've been monitoring the post since this morning. It's not just personal betrayal. He's compromised operational security and dishonored fallen soldiers to make points about military culture. This crosses lines that go far beyond family dynamics."
Over the next 48 hours, Dad's Facebook post continued spreading through legal and business networks, generating engagement that boosted his law firm's social media presence significantly. His post had been shared 89 times and was being discussed in several professional groups for attorneys, with many praising his honest perspective on military culture and veteran recognition. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the fallout at Fort Benning. Several fellow officers had seen the post or heard about it from others in their military networks. Most were supportive, expressing outrage that my own father would publicly question my combat service and use fallen soldiers as props for his argument about heroism. But what concerned me more were the questions from my commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Martinez, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and understood both the weight of combat leadership and the sensitivity of discussing operational details in public forums. "Captain Hayes," she said, calling me into her office Thursday afternoon, "your father's social media post has raised some concerns about operational security and the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information about combat operations." She opened her laptop and showed me screenshots I hadn't fully processed during my initial shock at discovering the post. Comments from people who seemed to know specific details about convoy operations, casualty procedures, and unit deployment schedules that weren't public information. "What's particularly troubling," Martinez continued, "is that your father shared details about specific combat incidents and fallen soldiers that could compromise ongoing security protocols. Whether he intended it or not, his post has provided information about military operations that could be valuable to hostile actors." She showed me analysis from the base public affairs office documenting how my promotion photo and Dad's commentary were being shared in online communities that actively monitored U.S. military activities. forums where my ceremony image was being used alongside discussions about military leadership, casualty rates, and operational effectiveness. The most concerning aspect is that several responses to your father's post demonstrate knowledge of classified information about your unit's activities in Iraq, Martinez explained, highlighting comments that revealed more about our missions than should have been accessible to civilian networks. But Colonel Martinez had discovered something that made the situation even more serious. Dad's law firm represented several defense contractors and military suppliers, giving him access to sensitive information about military procurement and operational planning through his professional relationships. Your father's public questioning of military heroism and combat effectiveness creates potential conflicts of interest with his firm's defense industry clients, she said. His post could be interpreted as compromising his ability to represent military contractors effectively, since he's publicly stated that surviving combat indicates inadequate risk-taking and commitment. That afternoon, I called David from my office, trying to process how a family dinner had escalated into questions about operational security and professional conflicts of interest. His voice carried the analytical tone he used when evaluating complex intelligence situations. "Rebecca, I've been researching your father's law firm and their client relationships," he said. Hayes, Morrison and Associates represents 3 major defense contractors, including companies that manufacture equipment used by the units you served with in Iraq. He paused, and when he continued, there was something different in his tone that suggested he had discovered information that would change everything. "But there's something else you need to know about your father's professional situation and his law firm's reputation in the defense industry, something that's going to make his Facebook post about military heroism much more problematic than just family embarrassment."
That evening, David arrived at our quarters with a stack of documents and his laptop, wearing the expression that meant he had uncovered something significant during his investigation into Dad's professional situation. "I've been researching your father's law firm and their business model," he said, settling in our kitchen table. "What he's done goes beyond family cruelty into professional misconduct." He opened his laptop and showed me Dad's law firm website, highlighting their military affairs division and their marketing materials that prominently featured their expertise in defense contracting and veteran-related legal services. Over the past 2 years, Hayes, Morrison, and Associates had been building their reputation as attorneys who understood military culture from the inside. "He's not just questioning your service, Rebecca," David explained, scrolling through the firm's client testimonials and case studies. "He's been monetizing his connection to your military career. Look at this marketing material from 6 months ago, where the firm advertises unique insight into military operations through family military service." The evidence was disturbing. Legal advertisements where Dad's firm claimed special expertise in military cases because of their direct family connections to active-duty combat veterans. Client brochures featuring photos of me in uniform, alongside marketing copy about the firm's insider understanding of military culture and veteran issues. But the most damaging discovery involved Dad's speaking engagements and professional networking activities. David had found documentation showing that my father had been presenting himself at legal conferences as someone with intimate knowledge of modern military operations through family military service. "He's built part of his professional brand around having a daughter in combat arms," David continued, showing me conference programs where Dad was listed as a speaker on topics like understanding military culture in legal practice and the reality behind military recognition and veteran claims. The calculated nature of Dad's exploitation was worse than I had imagined. His Facebook post questioning my heroism wasn't spontaneous family cruelty. It was part of a broader pattern of using my military service as credibility for his legal practice, while simultaneously undermining the value of that service. David pulled up the most damaging evidence yet: billing records and client files he had obtained through professional contacts, showing that Dad had been charging premium rates for legal services based on his claimed expertise in military affairs, derived entirely from his relationship with me.
He's essentially been selling access to your military experience to clients while publicly questioning the value and authenticity of your service, David said, his voice carrying controlled anger. He's built part of his professional brand around having a daughter in combat arms, David continued, showing me conference programs where Dad was listed as a speaker on topics like understanding military culture in legal practice and the reality behind military recognition and veteran claims. The scope of the hypocrisy was staggering. Dad had built a lucrative specialization around military legal services while publicly arguing that surviving combat veterans like me weren't real heroes. He was profiting from my military credentials while undermining their validity. But David had discovered something that would change everything about how Dad's professional community viewed his Facebook post. Hayes, Morrison, and Associates just signed a major contract with Northrop Grumman to handle their veteran employment legal compliance, he said, pulling up the contract announcement. Your father is now representing a defense contractor that employs thousands of combat veterans. The same veterans he just publicly declared aren't real heroes because they survived their deployments. The irony was perfect and devastating. Dad's law firm was being paid substantial fees to protect the employment rights of veteran combat veterans, while their senior partner publicly questioned whether those same veterans deserved recognition for their service.
David spent the weekend building a comprehensive case that approached Dad's activities from multiple angles simultaneously: professional misconduct, conflicts of interest, and potential bar association violations. But the most devastating element he discovered would expose the full scope of Dad's hypocrisy to the people who mattered most, his clients and professional peers. I've been researching the Georgia State Bar's professional conduct rules and your father's client relationships, David said Sunday evening, surrounded by legal documents and printouts. His Facebook post isn't just family cruelty. It's created massive ethical violations that could destroy his legal career. He showed me the Georgia State Bar's Rule 8.4, which prohibits conduct that reflects adversely on the lawyer's fitness to practice law. Dad's public statements questioning the heroism of combat veterans created obvious conflicts with his firm's representation of defense contractors and veteran-related legal services. Your father has been charging premium rates for military expertise while publicly stating that surviving combat veterans aren't real heroes, David explained. That's not just hypocritical, it's fraudulent misrepresentation of his qualifications and creates conflicts of interest with multiple clients. But David had discovered something that would change everything. Among Dad's current clients was the Gold Star Families Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided legal services to families of fallen service members. The foundation's board included Colonel Sarah Mitchell, my former commanding officer from Iraq, who had saved my life during the Fallujah firefight. Your war buddy Sarah is now on the board of an organization that pays your father's law firm for legal services, David said, pulling up the foundation's website. The same attorney who just publicly declared that real heroes don't come home is being paid by Gold Star families to protect the interests of families whose sons and daughters didn't come home. The irony was devastating, but David had uncovered an even more significant connection. Colonel Mitchell was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at Emma's high school graduation in 3 weeks. She had been invited because of her distinguished military service and her work with veteran advocacy organizations, the same work that connected her to Dad's law firm through the Gold Star Families Foundation. Sarah doesn't know about your father's Facebook post yet, David continued, pulling up Colonel Mitchell's biography and recent speeches, but when she discovers that her organization's attorney publicly questioned the heroism of surviving combat veterans, the institutional response will be swift and comprehensive. David showed me Colonel Mitchell's biography and recent speeches, highlighting her reputation as someone who fiercely defended the honor and sacrifice of all service members, both living and fallen. She had built her post-military career around ensuring that combat veterans received appropriate recognition and support.
She's going to be speaking at your daughter's graduation about the importance of service and sacrifice, David said. When she learns that the Gold Star Families Foundation is paying an attorney who believes surviving veterans aren't real heroes, she'll have both personal and institutional obligations to respond. But the most damaging evidence David had compiled involved Dad's systematic misrepresentation of his military expertise to clients and colleagues. Email chains where he described his intimate knowledge of combat operations through family military service. Legal briefs where he cited his credibility on military matters based on having a daughter in active combat duty. He's built his entire military law specialization on credentials he derives from your service, while simultaneously arguing that your service doesn't represent real heroism. When his clients and colleagues understand the contradiction, the professional consequences will be automatic and permanent. The case David had built was elegant in its precision, comprehensive documentation of ethical violations that would trigger automatic bar association investigations and client relationship terminations once the right people became aware of Dad's Facebook post and its implications for his professional credibility.
Monday morning, David presented me with a strategy that was both elegant and devastating in its precision. Instead of confronting Dad directly or pursuing lengthy legal proceedings, he would let professional accountability systems handle the situation through established channels. We're going to provide comprehensive documentation to the appropriate people and let institutional responses work exactly as they were designed, David explained, reviewing the materials he had prepared over the weekend. No personal confrontation, no family drama, just systematic evidence delivered to individuals who have the authority and responsibility to act on professional violations. His approach was methodical and comprehensive. First, a formal complaint to the Georgia State Bar documenting Dad's misrepresentation of military expertise and conflicts of interest with his veteran-related legal services. Second, notification to his defense contractor clients about his public statements questioning the heroism of surviving combat veterans. Third, copies of all documentation sent to the Gold Star Families Foundation Board, including Colonel Sarah Mitchell. But the most effective element of David's strategy involved something I hadn't anticipated. He had identified that Emma's graduation was still 3 weeks away, which meant Colonel Mitchell would discover Dad's Facebook post and his professional hypocrisy well before she was scheduled to speak at the ceremony. When Sarah learns that her organization is paying an attorney who publicly declared that real heroes don't come home, she'll have both personal and institutional obligations to respond, David explained. But more importantly, she'll be speaking at your daughter's graduation with full knowledge of what your father said about surviving combat veterans. The beauty of the approach was its complete adherence to proper procedures while being utterly devastating to Dad's professional reputation. Bar association complaints triggered automatic investigations. Defense contractors reviewed vendor relationships when attorneys publicly questioned military service. Gold Star family organizations protected their mission by distancing themselves from lawyers who dishonored veteran sacrifices. David had prepared a timeline that would ensure maximum impact with minimal personal involvement from us. The bar complaint would be filed Tuesday, giving the investigation time to develop before Emma's graduation. The client notifications would be sent Wednesday, allowing corporate legal departments to assess the reputational risks. The Gold Star Families Foundation documentation would arrive Thursday, providing Colonel Mitchell with complete context before her graduation speech. By the time Sarah takes the podium at Emma's graduation, she'll have full documentation of your father's professional misconduct and his public statements about combat veterans, David said, sealing the final envelope for the Foundation's board. What she chooses to say during her keynote address about service, sacrifice, and the heroism of surviving combat veterans will be entirely her decision. That evening, we sat on our Fort Benning quarters porch, watching the lights of the training facilities where I prepared young officers for the same combat challenges I had faced in Iraq. Somewhere in Atlanta, Dad was probably preparing legal briefs and client presentations, confident that his Facebook post about military heroism had enhanced his professional credibility with defense industry contacts.
He had no idea that his systematic exploitation of my military service while questioning my heroism was about to collide with the most distinguished officer I had served alongside, someone who understood both the true cost of combat leadership and the institutional obligations that came with defending military honor. The same graduation ceremony he would attend expecting to see his granddaughter receive her diploma would become the venue where his professional hypocrisy and personal cruelty would be exposed to the entire community that mattered most to our family.
The response was swift and devastating. By Tuesday afternoon, the Georgia State Bar had opened a formal investigation into Dad's professional conduct, focusing on his misrepresentation of military expertise and potential conflicts of interest with veteran-related clients. By Wednesday morning, Northrop Grumman's legal department had requested an immediate meeting to discuss their concerns about continuing their veteran employment compliance contract with Hayes Morrison and Associates. But the real damage came Thursday when Colonel Sarah Mitchell received David's comprehensive documentation package at the Gold Star Families Foundation offices. According to my contact in military public affairs, who maintained connections throughout the veteran advocacy community, Mitchell spent less than 20 minutes reviewing the materials before calling an emergency board meeting. The Facebook post that Dad believed had demonstrated his realistic perspective on military heroism had instead provided a Gold Star Families board member with documented evidence that their legal counsel publicly viewed surviving combat veterans as less heroic than those who died. The same attorney who collected fees for protecting Gold Star family interests had declared that real heroes don't come home. Mitchell's response was immediate and institutional. The Gold Star Families Foundation terminated their legal services contract with Hayes Morrison and Associates that afternoon, citing fundamental conflicts between counsel's public statements and organizational mission. But more significantly, Mitchell requested all documentation about my military service and Dad's exploitation of our family relationship for his professional benefit. By Friday morning, the legal community's professional networks were quietly circulating information about the Hayes situation. Defense contractors who utilized his firm for military-related legal services were reviewing their vendor relationships after learning about his public statements questioning combat veteran heroism. Legal conferences were reconsidering his scheduled speaking engagements about understanding military culture. Dad's phone began ringing with calls he couldn't understand. Corporate clients were expressing concerns about potential reputational risks from association with an attorney who publicly questioned military service. The Georgia Association of Defense Lawyers had quietly removed him from their upcoming panel on veteran employment issues after multiple member complaints about his Facebook post. But the most significant development came Friday afternoon when Dad received a call from Emma's high school principal, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, informing him that the graduation keynote speaker had specifically requested to meet with our family before the ceremony. Colonel Mitchell wanted to discuss military service recognition with the Hayes family as part of her speech preparation. Dad had no idea that his professional destruction was directly connected to the graduation ceremony he was planning to attend. The same distinguished officer whose organization had just fired his law firm would be speaking to a crowd that included his granddaughter, his daughter, the combat veteran, and the entire Atlanta community that knew our family. That weekend, while I was conducting final training exercises at Fort Benning, Dad was desperately trying to contain the damage to his professional reputation. According to Mom, who called me Saturday evening, he had spent the entire day making phone calls to clients and colleagues, trying to explain that his Facebook post had been misinterpreted and didn't reflect his actual views on military service. But the legal profession's informal networks had already processed the information about his hypocrisy. Word was spreading that Robert Hayes Sr. had built his military law expertise on credentials derived from his daughter's combat service while simultaneously questioning whether surviving veterans deserved recognition. The contradiction was too obvious and too damaging to ignore. Sunday morning, I received a call that changed everything. Colonel Mitchell's voice was warm, but carried the authority that had made her such an effective combat commander in Iraq. "Captain Hayes, I wanted to reach out before your daughter's graduation next week," she said.
I've been reviewing some concerning information about your father's public statements regarding combat veterans, and I think it's important that we discuss the content of my keynote address. She have received David's documentation, reviewed Dad's Facebook post and professional exploitation of my service, and was now planning her graduation speech with full knowledge of the family dynamics involved. The same officer who had saved my life in Fallujah was about to speak publicly about military heroism to an audience that included the man who had declared that real heroes don't come home. Rebecca, I want you to know that my speech will focus on the courage and sacrifice of all service members, both those who made the ultimate sacrifice and those who continue serving after surviving combat. I believe the community needs to understand what real military heroism looks like, especially when some people seem confused about whether surviving veterans deserved recognition and respect. The institutional response was complete and devastating. Dad's professional reputation was in ruins, his client base was abandoning him, and his granddaughter's graduation ceremony would feature a keynote address about military heroism delivered by someone who knew exactly what he had said about surviving combat veterans. Emma's graduation was 5 days away, and Dad had no idea that his attendance would place him in the audience while a distinguished Gold Star family's board member explained to the entire community what it meant to honor military service and veterans' sacrifice.
The morning of Emma's graduation dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect May weather that made outdoor ceremonies feel like celebrations rather than obligations. I sat in the family section of Northside High School's football stadium, wearing my dress blue uniform at Emma's request, watching hundreds of families gather to celebrate their children's achievements. Dad arrived with Mom exactly on time, wearing his best suit and carrying himself with the professional dignity he had maintained throughout his legal career, despite the week of devastating phone calls and client defections. He had no idea that the keynote speaker who would address the crowd in 20 minutes was the same Colonel Sarah Mitchell whose organization had just terminated his law firm's contract. At precisely 10 a.m., the graduating class processed onto the field in their paps and gowns, and Emma caught my eye from her place in the alphabetical lineup, beaming with the kind of joy that made all the deployments and missed milestones worthwhile. Dr. Walsh took the podium to introduce the keynote speaker, and I felt Dad shift beside me as he heard Colonel Mitchell's name and military biography for the first time. Our keynote speaker is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a distinguished combat veteran who served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart for her exceptional leadership under fire. She currently serves on the board of the Gold Star Families Foundation and advocates tirelessly for veteran recognition and support. When Colonel Mitchell took the podium, she looked exactly as I remembered her from our days in Iraq, composed, authoritative, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence that came from having led soldiers through impossible situations and brought most of them home alive. Parents, families, and graduates, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the stadium. I want to talk today about real heroism and what it means to serve something larger than ourselves. I felt Dad go very still beside me as Mitchell continued her speech, systematically addressing every argument he had made in his Facebook post about surviving veterans and authentic heroism. Some people believe that heroism requires the ultimate sacrifice, that only those who don't come home deserve to be called heroes, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had buried too many friends. But I've learned that real heroism often lies in the courage to keep serving after surviving trauma, to dedicate your life to training the next generation, to carry the memory of fallen comrades while continuing the mission they died protecting. Mitchell's eyes found mine in the crowd as she continued her speech. I had the honor of serving alongside Captain Rebecca Hayes in Iraq, and I watched her risk her life repeatedly to save her soldiers.
She survived 3 combat deployments, not through luck or by avoiding danger, but because she was exceptionally skilled at keeping her people alive under impossible conditions. The silence in the stadium was complete as Mitchell addressed the audience with increasing intensity. The notion that surviving combat makes someone less heroic than those who died is not just wrong, it's cruel to the families of service members and dishonoring to those who gave their lives. Every veteran who came home carries the responsibility of living up to the sacrifice of those who didn't. Dad's face had gone pale as he began to understand that this wasn't coincidental, that the keynote speaker was directly addressing his Facebook post and his public statements about military heroism. The realization that his professional destruction and this public rebuke were connected was dawning on him with devastating clarity.
To the graduating class, Mitchell concluded, I want you to understand that heroism comes in many forms. It's found in those who make the ultimate sacrifice, and it's found in those who survive trauma and dedicate their lives to serving others. Both deserve our recognition, our respect, and our gratitude. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes, and as the crowd settled back into their seats, Dad finally understood the scope of what had happened to him. His professional reputation had been destroyed not through personal vendetta, but through institutional accountability triggered by his own documented violations and public statements. After the ceremony, Colonel Mitchell approached our family with the same direct manner she had used during combat briefings. "Mr. Hayes," she said, extending her hand to Dad with professional courtesy, "I believe we have mutual acquaintances at the Gold Star Families Foundation. They've shared some concerns about recent social media posts regarding military heroism." The conversation that followed was brief and devastatingly polite, as Mitchell explained that military communities protect their own through systematic accountability rather than personal confrontation. Dad's Facebook post and professional exploitation of my service had triggered institutional responses that would be permanent and comprehensive. 6 months later, as I received the Legion of Merit for developing new training protocols that had saved hundreds of lives in subsequent deployments, I reflected on how Dad's attempt to diminish my service had ultimately led to enhanced recognition for combat veterans throughout the military community. Dad had lost his military law practice, his professional reputation, and his standing in the legal community that had once respected his expertise. The Georgia State Bar investigation concluded with sanctions that would follow him for the remainder of his career. Emma, now a college freshman, understood that heroism wasn't determined by who died and who survived, but by who stood up when others needed them most. Some battles end with personal reconciliation, others with institutional change that protects people who serve purposes larger than family approval. Colonel Mitchell's speech had reached beyond our family to an entire community, teaching them that military service deserved respect regardless of who came home and who didn't. Dad had learned that attacking veterans carried consequences in institutions he never imagined, administered by people who understood the true cost of military service.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.